So, Rod, today you wrote a piece on an experiment in ayahuasca with a fellow writer, Sarab Amari, and as a kind of an experiment. And I think it's an important topic. You and I have spoken about before. The experimentations with psychedelics and psilocybin and mushrooms and whatnot is very popular. People are talking a lot about it. And I wonder if you could just sort of give us a quick sort of rundown of what that personal essay was about and how we might see it in the context of what you've been doing, the work that you've been doing for the past 4 years.
Sure. Well, and by the way, Kale, glad to be back. The boys
Oh
are
my
back in
gosh.
town.
Yeah. I didn't mean to be so business-like. Yes, I'm super excited to get the band back together here and jump in. So
okay, so what Sarab wrote about for Compact Magazine is about this sort of bespoke experience he had in Mexico at an ayahuasca retreat. Yeah. Most of our listeners will know that ayahuasca is this vine that grows in South America that has been used for many years in ceremonies, visionary ceremonies. It has hallucinogenic properties. The active ingredient is DMT, which some people like Joe Rogan, for example, take recreationally. But ayahuasca gives these incredibly intense visionary experiences for people. Some people say they leave their bodies, they see crazy things and so on. But some people also say they've experienced healing with these experiences. So Sarab goes down there to try it himself. And he's upfront in his essay about how, he's a Catholic, he's a faithful Catholic. He had real trepidation about doing it because he wondered if this was something that he ought to be doing as a Catholic. But he talked his way through it and prayed his way through it. He took ayahuasca, they brew it up in this foul-tasting liquid sort of soup. And he took it in the context of a ceremony, a ritual pagan ceremony there.
Interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of people who were there, in fact, it seems like everybody else who was there was some sort of Western New Ager or elites from Mexico City who were coming to have the experience.
So like drug tourism.
Yeah, like drug tourism. But some of them said they wanted to be healed and all that. Okay, maybe. Sure. So Sarab talked about what happened there and how he chose not to participate in any of the spiritual aspects, like the hymns they sang, because according to as Sarab explained it, the shamans would chant these special songs that can reach down and heal the participant, right? Sarab said he didn't feel right as a Christian doing that, so he didn't do it. There's this really interesting aspect of the essay, though, Kale, where there's an American named Todd who tries to talk him through this at the very beginning. He says, look, you shouldn't feel bad about doing it. Think of it this way. Think of it as like not a spiritual experience, but a technology. That word is so key. Yes. A technology that allows you to use energies and intelligences to heal yourself. And so
I know that's a trigger word for both of us.
Yeah.
Just really quick, just in terms of the frame of the essay or the context of the essay, was it understood by Sarab as a kind of trigger word, or would it just sort of pass through? Like, in other words, is this like an emphasis added by Rod, or how did that work in the essay?
No, it's an emphasis added by Rod because Sarab reports it, but he doesn't comment on it.
Good. Okay.
And,
that's what I thought.
What jumped out at me about this is that calling it a technology is a way of saying this is magic, because as opposed to religion, right? Because what does magic do definitionally? It's an attempt to use through rituals and incantations to invoke spirits and so-called higher powers to do the bidding of the person doing it. A magician is a kind of technician. And what I write about in my book, Living in Wonder, which just came out, is the danger of false enchantment through technology. Now, I write about it in terms of AI, transhumanism, all these different kinds of technologies that will that purport to raise us to a higher level as human beings. I think this is false enchantment and could even not necessarily demonic, but it could be demonic. I think in the case of what Sarab was dealing with, it was clearly demonic, but it's so important to me to note for our listeners that this man who was trying to convince Sarab not to worry about it spiritually did so by telling him, "Oh no, it's just a technology."
Right.
Kale,
Right.
you remember in the book of Acts, Simon Magus, Simon the
Yeah.
magician, who was a newly baptized Christian, but he had it in his mind that Christianity was just a better technology than magic,
Right.
and he wanted to buy the powers, the mystical powers, God-given powers that the apostles had. And St. Peter rebuked him heavily and said, you don't even know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
Shame on you for trying to think you can buy the power of God. But that's exactly what these people, these ayahuasca people, are trying to do.
Right, and a power it is. I think what is interesting to me is that we, by using this phrase, this is just a technology. I think it's important. This is something that I bang on about on Twitter all the time. This is a form of a magic spell. In other words, it's a way of smuggling in something by calling it, that word just, using it as,
Mhm.
oh, it's just XYZ. Well, it's just a technology, sort of is an attempt to denude it from its ability to sort of snag or prick our conscience, right? It functions as a sort of a confounding spell,
Yeah.
and I think you're correct in terms of calling it, by dismissing it as just a technology. We forget what actually is the nature of that technology itself. And Rod, I'm rereading. Actually, I'm teaching. Um, uh, Lewis's Ransom trilogy right now, and there are a couple of key moments, especially in Paralandra, where he talks about this collapsing of these two realms that we seem to have treated in different and distinct ways. We've got the sort of the realm of the kind of the alien and the reptilian, or the sort of the fantastical, and then the realm of the technological. And what you see worked out, I think, in this trilogy wonderfully is that this is just a sort of a delusion that we hold, that they really
Right.
are a kind of a one that is, I think what you're going to say here is probably a little dangerous, right?
Oh, more than a little dangerous. I
Yeah.
mean, what's so interesting about the way this guy Todd that Sorab encountered, what's so interesting is he admits that it's spiritual. He says that these are
Mm,
intelligences and these
mhm.
are energies, but he's trying to frame it for Sorab as a technology to denature it. It doesn't make sense what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's trying to have it both ways. And to his credit, Sorab doesn't really seem to buy it over the
Yeah.
course of his essay. I keep waiting for something really horrible and demonic to happen, but it never quite does for Sorab. He says he did have some pretty horrible visions,
Okay.
uh, but in the end, it's not the kind of thing that I've read before about people's testimonies about
Yeah.
ayahuasca. And I don't know whether that's because he didn't take enough of the drug. He did say
Okay.
he took less than most, or
Uh-huh.
whether it was his holding back out of fear as a Christian that he shouldn't be
Sure.
doing this.
Yeah, I
And
mean, he could have some sort of residual, protections. I mean, he's a
could,
sacramental Christian, and
yeah,
perhaps there was some residual protections that kept him maybe from sort of going over,
yeah.
so to speak.
It could
Well,
be. It could be, Kale, but I
yeah,
have to say that, I noticed yesterday before I'd even read
uh-huh,
the Sorab's piece,
uh-huh,
Ross Douthat, who's a friend of Sorab,
yeah,
said, Sorab is my friend, but he ought to have known better as a Christian to go mess with this stuff because we are clearly forbidden as Christians to do that. Now, Sorab does say in
mm,
his essay that the writing among Catholic moral theologians about the licitness of psychedelics is very scant,
yeah,
and I'll take his word on
yeah,
that. But I found out through my research for Living in Wonder
uh-huh,
that this is something that no Christian should ever mess with,
uh-huh.
not because these drugs don't work, but because
Right.
they do.
Right, right. And I think that's such an important turn that we have to make sense out of. And because there's so much of the, sort of the chatter out there is like, oh, it's just a drug, or oh, it's just it does weird things sort of inside our brains. But, there's this sort of maintenance of the imminent frame, right? That it's not, at the end of the day, it's not real, other than some weird kind of chemicals going back and forth,
Right.
interacting with our own sort of material substrate of ourselves. And I think you're right. It's like, no, it's the other way around. These things are not to be messed with, not because it's fake, but they're not to be messed with because they're very real.
Yeah, if you are a philosophical materialist, if you think that the world outside our head is nothing but dead matter, then it makes sense that all the stuff that would happen to you under the influence of psychedelic drugs, ayahuasca, LSD, and all that is only in your imagination.
Right.
But if you believe, as Christians, traditional Christians are supposed to believe, that matter and spirit interpenetrate in some mysterious way. I mean, look at us. This is what the incarnation means, that spirit and matter come together to produce the human person. Well,
Right.
as a Catholic and as an Orthodox, you and I believe
Yeah.
that it's not that simple, that
Right.
matter is not dead, that in some way spirit does penetrate matter in ways that we can't necessarily define, but are real. And this, I believe, is why these drugs are so dangerous. And in fact, this might actually, the use of psychedelic drugs and the spiritual experiences that people say they have on them are probably a good backdoor refutation of materialism and
Yeah.
dualism, the idea that there's a mind-body split.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. No, I've been chewing on this quite a bit, that we have been stuck in this kind of subjective objective kind of binary for a really long time, really, since well, I suppose you can sort of do the Descartes game, and maybe, as you always say, sort of this begins post Thomas, with the sort of the nominalist turn,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
but really, so we see the full flowering of this flattened modern sensibility, this material frame, throughout the 20th century. And now we seem to be on this other side of, well, the myth of materialism has run its course. We've spent the better part of 500 years discarding the image, to use Lewis's frame, and there seems to be a genuine dissatisfaction with the thinness of materialism. And I
mm-hmm.
wonder, Rod, in the essay, does Sarab at all get into why? Like, why did he do this? What is going on here?
It just seemed like it was curiosity, to be
Okay.
honest. I mean, and he talks about how some people, and this is true, have reported dramatic healings from using psychedelic drugs. You've had people talk about veterans, for example, of war, talking about how they were able to be instantly cured of their PTSD from using psychedelics. I take that seriously. There's more.
Yeah.
These reports are not just anecdotal. That doesn't mean, though, that these things are not dangerous. I mean, opioids can take away pain, but they can also destroy your life if you're not
Mm-hmm.
careful with them.
Mm-hmm.
And in reporting Living in Wonder, I talked to people who had used psychedelics, including a lengthy interview with a man who's an academic. I call him Jonah. That's the name I give him in the book. And heavy use of psychedelic drugs, all kinds of psychedelic drugs, were
Recreational or
yeah. Well,
yeah.
DMT.
Yeah.
He said they use so many different kinds of things, but these were key parts of his occult worship and occult
Mm-hmm.
experience. And when he came out of the occult, when he realized that he wasn't speaking to the old gods and gods, but actually demons who wanted to destroy him, he became a Christian. And he warns in no uncertain terms that nobody should mess with these drugs because, he says, and I've heard this from others, they open you up to the spiritual world in ways that to use Charles Taylor's terms, they take away the buffering, I suppose.
Yeah,
And
right. Or the right. Yeah. Well, I think, just to be a sort of a nudge here, I think that when we say these things are sort of like the myth of the buffer itself and the myth of the porous self, I think my sense of that is that the myths are sort of the spells and the stories that we tell about our world, our social imaginary. And so I think both of us, as sacramental Orthodox Christians, would say the porous self is the more real myth.
right.
Okay, right. So it's not just that we don't actually have sort of spiritual firewalls that surround us. In fact, that is the sort of the emperor has no clothes reality of this myth of the buffered self. There are no such protections, right?
Well, no, I would slightly disagree with you
Okay,
there.
okay, okay.
No, I think that you're mostly right that that the buffered self is an illusion.
Uh-huh.
However, as someone who earlier in my life, before I became a Christian, did experiment with LSD,
Yeah.
I can tell you that our normal consciousness is a buffering. I mean, I'm talking about,
Oh, I see what
I'm
you're
not
saying.
talking about social and philosophical
Yeah,
buffering.
yeah.
And if I remember my pharmacology correctly from those happy days at LSU, LSD works by reducing the
The filter,
serotonin in the brain, right? Or it somehow affects the serotonin uptake of the brain,
right?
such that the person, while he's on the drug, experiences all of reality and with much more
Yeah.
intensity. So,
Okay.
and it can be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
For example, all of your senses are really heightened. I remember seeing this is funny. When I was at LSU once tripping, I ran into the head of the college Republicans in the LSU Student Union, and he was wearing a cranberry colored tie, and I could taste the
Oh,
cherry or cranberry flavor on my tongue.
oh,
And I
funny.
asked the poor guy if I could lick his tie. Yeah.
Well, no. So this is interesting. I want to stop here just for a second because I take your point. I think there's a serious thing here, like that the myth of the buffered self is not so much that there is no such thing as a buffer, but we might over privilege the notion that this buffer is much more of a firewall than it actually is.
Right.
That's not to say that we don't have these filters that are up on a day-to-day basis, right? I mean, we have to make our way through our day. We can only pay attention to what we can pay
That's right.
attention to, right? So in some sense, these I actually believe that you can taste his cranberry tie, right? Like you're in this sort of moment where you see the color, you see the tie, it invokes cranberry, you can taste that. Like I
Yeah.
actually believe that that's real, right? In
Yeah.
other words, the powers of the mind, I think we in a weird way sort of grossly underestimate, right? We grossly
Sure.
underestimate the power of the imagination. And we know this even in sort of very simple ways, right? And the difference between, me throwing some slop on a plate, it might be very tasty, right? But if I go to a fine restaurant and the presentation is first rate, and we've got multiple colors with greens and purples and browns, right? Sort of making these things pop, we can pre-taste the brilliance of the plate just by its presentation, right? So I do think the imagination is
Mhm.
powerful that way. So maybe the way that the acid trip works is that those normal sort of defenses that we put up in order to negotiate our way throughout the world get lessened, and so it sort of unleashes latent powers of the imagination.
Oh, that's true. I mean, look, I'm what they call a super taster.
Right.
I have more taste buds in my tongue and more, receptacles. So I taste all things more intensely than most people do. I didn't realize this till I was much older.
That's interesting.
But in the case of LSD, for me at least, when I did it that first time, it also made me hyper spiritually aware in
Yeah.
ways that I hadn't been before. The guy I did it with was my sweet natured Jewish hippie roommate from New Orleans. And
Yeah.
I would say I lost touch with him many years ago, but I would say that he probably only had fun on it. But
Yeah.
in my case, I really felt God everywhere present, filling all things. There seemed to be a fundamental energy and unity to everything around me. And here's the
Right.
interesting thing.
Right.
When the drug wore off after 12 hours, I didn't think that I had been given a false picture of the world. I felt that the veil had been lifted. Rupert Sheldrake, the renegade biologist in the UK, has written that this is almost the universal testimony of people who use psychedelics. They don't think they've hallucinated. They feel that they've been granted a temporary period of seeing things more clearly than they would normally. This is something that's very hard to convey to people who've not done it. And this is why in my book, I mean, look, I became a Christian years later after all this, and I've tried not to talk about that. And I haven't talked about
Yeah.
it in public because I don't, a little bit embarrassing to say that
Sure,
I
sure.
experimented with this, although lately now it wouldn't be embarrassing. But for
No,
most
no,
of my
not at
life,
all.
it would have been. And I don't want to encourage people to do it. Nevertheless, for the sake of honesty, I have to say that it was a key marker on my pilgrimage towards becoming a Christian. Because when I took it that night, I took it just out of despair. I was,
Right,
pining away over unrequited love for a
right,
girl, and
right,
I
right, right.
was just so wrapped up in myself and stuck in my own head. I took that drug, and boom, the next on Monday morning, I was living in a different world. My depression was mostly gone, and I went to the college bookstore looking for books about Christianity.
Right.
So it had a happy ending with me, and I've heard this from a few other people, but I would never do it again, and I wouldn't recommend people doing it because I got lucky. I've had
Well,
people who haven't been nearly as lucky. I've heard from
well,
them.
so I wonder what I wondered about your story in this regard, Rod. You have this moment in college. It opens you up. It changes you. You can see. Look. I mean, even right now, all these many years later, you're kind of dating yourself from. There was before this moment and there was after this moment. You're still Rod. You're still who you are. How do you think that allowed you to be unmade when you stepped into Chart a few years later?
No, Shark came first. I was
Oh,
17 when I went to Shark.
oh, so that's really
Yeah,
interesting to
and I
me.
was 19 when I did this drug. But
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up, though, because in a way it was a continuation of that experience, or a recapitulation of that
Yeah.
experience. When I walked into the cathedral at Chartres as a 17-year-old agnostic,
Uh-huh.
I was just overwhelmed by the presence of God in the stones and the stained glass, not only by the beauty, but there seemed to be, to me, in that moment, something more than
Yeah.
just the combination of stones and glass, right?
Uh-huh.
And it awakened me. That was the first awakening I had to the possibility that, what, there might be more than what we see. And I left
Yeah.
that cathedral on a search. Now, I was a seeker. It was a messy journey, and
Yeah.
LSD was a brief part of that. But it would be wrong of me to deny that it had that experience. And in fact, I'm glad I did, because it helps me realize that all these young people today, and not so young people, who are desperate for a sense of the transcendent, an experience of the transcendent, of the numinous, who are desperate to have the veil torn down so they can, at least for a time, feel like there's something beyond the material limits. I understand why they're doing it, and they
Right.
will get a sense of that. But it is a lie, or it can easily be a lie, and you can mess yourself up permanently there. If you go on the internet or onto Reddit, there's
Yeah.
so many testimonies from people, not all Christians at all, who've had deep, dark spiritual experiences in these worlds. There's some doors that just should not be opened.
Yeah. Well, I'm struck, because in discussion of the Amari essay, you talk about, or he Tom, I think, is the guy who talks about these drugs.
Todd.
Todd, sorry, talks about these drugs as a technology. Well, I mean, there's no greater testament to the sort of the power of a psychotechnology like a cathedral. Those cathedrals, the Shard in particular, but other cathedrals, of course, these are technologies, designed in such a way to induce some kind of effect upon you. And any
Mhm.
of us who've ever stepped into any of these cathedrals, whether you're Catholic or Christian or Orthodox or not, you go into these places and you have a bodily experience. And I remember the first time the top of my head being blown off by walking into St. Peter's Cathedral. I remember that. I remember walking into Notre Dame the first time, and um, uh, desperately trying to. I went by myself, and I didn't speak any French, of course, and I'm desperately trying to connect because something is happening to me physically and spiritually, and I need to do something about it. But that's a technology, right? And so you feel confident, at a place like Chart, that it is sort of designed in the proper spirit, in the proper orientation. But what if you don't have that? So I'm intrigued now that I had always flipped your story, Rod. I had always put it, trip, then but even that, like going on a trip, like, it's a
Yeah,
but
interesting.
your trip, I didn't so the fact that you went to Chart first, right, and then you have this other trip, right, I wonder if that is sort of, a blessing or a happy fault, if you will, that you had that kind of prior orientation of this transcendent stone and marble and glass accomplishment or achievement, and then you have this thing that sort of rips you up from the inside. Thank God you had that prior imprint upon you. Or I don't know if that makes any sense to
No,
you or not.
here's an interest, a thought that you just raised by this your discourse. To call a cathedral or any work of art or architecture a technology seems somehow it could be misleading. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because technology, as I understand it, properly understood, it's about giving human beings more control over their environment, right? Techne.
Yes. Yes.
Now,
I'm with you.
you are absolutely right that they build cathedrals and create works of art to take us out of the everyday and give us a glimpse at something higher, at God. We're talking about Christian art, Christian churches.
Yeah.
But would it be, and I'm just speculating here,
Yeah.
would it be proper to call those technologies, even though they are meant to do something, but they're not meant to give the person more power? They're meant to proclaim God and to draw the person out of themselves. Because, when I was in Chartres, this is not a unique experience.
Yeah.
I felt both much smaller than
Yes.
I am
Yes.
and much larger than I am.
Yeah, that's right. It's this, you're right, and I think that's part of the experience. You know what I'm talking about when you're the top of your head blows off when you kind of look up and you're so small, right? You're so small, but you're immediately, for me, as I'm sort of remembering all of this, it's like, but it's also at the same time the sense of like, I'm so small, but here I am, like I'm in the nave, I'm in the ship, I'm in the craft, the bark, you can see that the church plays on all those images, right? You're all, and so it is both a kind of recognition of your seeming insignificance, but also the fact that you have been called in this moment to be here amidst this grand, powerful thing. So it's an interesting push-pull there for me.
Well, it is, because you are reduced, you are humbled, but also resurrected is not the word I'm looking for. Embiggened is not the word either, Simpsons fans. But you were raised up by being shown that you were part of something far greater than you could have known.
That's right.
And that was how it hit me as a teenager. I'm like, it wasn't impersonal. It wasn't like, wow, look at all this beauty. This beauty had meaning. I felt standing there in that labyrinth that God exists and he wants me. He wants a relationship with me. Now, I wasn't ready for a relationship with him. Obviously, if I were, I wouldn't have, gone back to college, gotten depressed, and gotten, tried drugs.
Yeah, of course.
But I think that what I'm trying to burrow in on, and this is such a good question of yours, is how does the quote unquote technology in a cathedral, or let's say an icon, a work of art, how does it differ from ordinary technology? I mean, it is material, a confection of matter that is meant to invoke a certain experience and take us to a place, but it is not a place that increases our power, right? In fact, it's a place that causes us to surrender our power to God. So it's a sacramental technology, if you will.
Yeah.
But can technology be sacramental?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, we're sort of we're straining with the words here, but I think that's exactly right. I mean, Rod, how can a piece of bread and a cup of wine be transformed into the body and blood of Christ, right? So it's always the meeting of matter and spirit. That our destinies are material and spiritual, and so our job, our calling, is to sort of find ways to shrink that distance, like within us, that I am, what is it? I think Pajot talks about that idea of that we're amphibians, we sort of swim in two realms, we exist in the material plane and the spiritual plane at the same time. And that sense of sacramentality is that matter itself is enchanted. I mean, look, I think this is your book, right? That we have been taught to sort of separate these two things away from one another, right? I mean, how can you you can't cut down the sacred grove if you think in cutting down the sacred grove, you will unleash the spirits of the grove,
Yeah,
right? The
yeah,
way you do it is you pretend there's no such thing as the sacred, there's no such thing as the spirit realm, and then you can, mow down the forest so that you can make stuff, right? I mean, so it's just, but so it's not as if, but should we say it's not as if there's some sort of prohibition about making things,
no, no, no.
but it's a sort of a recognition that that what we're engaging in is not just, what is it is it Heidegger, I think, who talks about this notion of looking at nature as standing reserve, like it's just sort of a warehouse where we can sort of use
Mm,
to sort of grab things and make things, and I think what we're sensing here is that we human beings, right, are not standing reserve. Like, we human beings are not just sort of the playthings of but rather we hold a kind of importance, not because you can sort of break me down into my constituent parts. This part is water, and this part is collagen, and this part is bone and blood, and all that. I can do that game, right? I can cut me up and sort of quarter me out, but that somehow the soul is the sort of the sense of this material. And so not only is the soul important, but the material that is gathered and formed into this being is important, is spiritual, is
right.
important, or something. Again,
Yeah,
words run out.
let me tell a practical story to kind of make this
Yeah.
concrete. This is told in the chapter in my book, Living in Wonder, that talks about the occult.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was on Allie Beth Stuckey's podcast the other day,
Oh,
and she
great.
wanted to focus mostly on this because she said so many of her listeners are dealing with this in their real lives, especially among the young.
Yeah.
But there's a story in there that you're familiar with because I told you this not long after we met, but it's there in the book. It's about these two friends of mine, old Catholic friends of mine in New York
Oh, yeah.
City, Nathan
Yeah.
and Emma. They live on the Upper East Side, fancy Upper East Side people, faithful Catholics, at Mass every time the door opens, that sort of thing. But some years ago, Nathan contacted me and told me Emma was possessed. Like, wait, what?
Right.
No, I'm sorry, it's true. And I won't retell the whole story here,
Yeah.
but I went to see them, and she was working with an exorcist. She was examined by a psychiatrist from the Archdiocese of New York that they keep on retainer to evaluate these cases to see if there's any possible material explanation. There was not in her case. So anyway, I went to see them while she was in the middle of this. I happened to be in New York, and Nathan brought me up to their apartment to see her. She knew I was coming.
Yeah.
Before we went in, Nathan said, at some point, we're going to sit out on the balcony to talk. At some point, I'm going to go in to get some lemonade for us, and I'm going to slip into my pocket a relic of the True Cross that the exorcist working with us gave to me for protection when she has these episodes.
Yeah.
Watch what she does.
Right.
So sure enough, we're sitting out there on the balcony. Emma and I are talking, and she's a beautiful woman, just having a normal conversation. When he comes back and sets that tray down on the table, she stops mid-sentence. Her head drops, her chin to her chest. When it rises, her face is not her own. There was this look of intense hatred for her husband on that face.
Wow.
And she growls at him in this deep voice. She said, I told you not to bring that blankety blank stuff around me.
Wow.
And then she draws back, her head drops again, she raises it, and her face is normal. But she had this look of such pain and sadness. She said, I'm so sorry, that's not me. I said, I know. What it was, though, the reason I tell this story here, how is it that she knew what was in his pocket and that it was a blessed relic?
Right.
And why did that have so much power to infuriate the demon inside her? Second point of this story, she was finally delivered from the demon, even though she didn't have a formal ritual exorcism. The thing that did it, her priest at one point, the priest who was doing these deliverance prayers, waiting for the cardinal to approve the ritual exorcism, he said to her, I have an idea, because his prayers weren't working very well. He said, I have an idea. You were baptized in Italy back in 1970, around then. A few years after the Second Vatican Council, which did a lot of reformation in the church, there was a lot of silly, crazy stuff going on. He said, I have a sense that we need to rebaptize you. You might not have been baptized in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Let's do it again on the condition that it's not going to hurt if you're already baptized. Fine, she says. She gets baptized. Boom.
Wow.
90% of all of her demonic problems went away, and it took not much longer for the priest to deal with the rest of it.
Wow.
Now, water and poured over this woman with certain words said by a priest. And it makes this dramatic, instantaneous change in her for the better. What does that tell you about the connection between matter and spirit?
That's right.
You know, I mean,
wow, that's a powerful story. You know, man, the world is just so much stranger than we believe. You know, as we
that's the first line of my book.
Right.
And you know who said it to me, Cale? This guy, a Catholic lawyer in the U.S., who saw a UFO, and when he was a teenager, 7 years go by, and when he saw it, he was in like rural New England or somewhere. He saw it hovering over a field and said, "I don't know what that is, but I better not tell anybody. They're going to think I'm crazy."
Crazy, yeah.
7 years later, he's studying for law school in some city, and a portal opens up on his kitchen wall, and these two shimmering humanoid beings come through and start communicating with him. And again, I won't tell the whole story, but you can find it online. In fact, the first chapter, it's the very first story of the book. The first chapter is available for free online. Maybe you can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll put it in the link.
Yeah. But anyway, he started being visited by these things regularly, and he hated them. And he is reaching out to me because he had read some tweeting I'd done about Diana Pasulka and
Enchantment. Of course.
And he wanted to talk to his priest about it. It had been going on for years. And his wife, he'd even got married, and his wife saw it too after they got married. So he knew he wasn't imagining it. And I said, "So Nino, did you ever pray when these things, these entities appeared?" "Yeah, a couple times." "What happened?" "Well, they went away." I said, "Didn't that make you think they might be demonic?" And he goes, "You know, I didn't really think of it that way. I figured if they were demons, they would want to fight me." I said, No, I've talked to exorcists who've had this same exact situation with people who've seen UFOs. I told him, I wouldn't talk to your parish priest. I would call the exorcist of your archdiocese. He did. The exorcist prayed over him. No more problems. I saw him. It was over a year later. I saw him recently on a trip to the U.S. He said, "It's been great. Those things thought they were going to drive me away from Christ, but they've driven me closer to Christ." But the first line of my book, Living in Wonder, is his words. The world is not what we think it is.
Right. Yeah. And of course, I really feel, Rod, maybe, I know you believe this, so but I really feel like we're at this weird point, where for so long we operated in this flattened world, because it's so powerful. Our technologies are so powerful. Our ability to harness science is so powerful and real, right? I mean, neither of us are idiots in that regard at all.
I'm an idiot in a very different sense.
Right, exactly. Thank you very much. But it really feels like we human beings know, like we know that the weirdness that we have collectively ignored for a very long time, because it doesn't pay, it's low status, it's all of these things. I mean, even what we're doing right now, I mean, I would have a hard time imagining us having this conversation broadcast out on the YouTubes, 15 years ago. Right. I mean, it's just like, it would be the kind of thing. In fact, I think, early on, it would be the kind of thing that you and I would sort of chat back and forth about. Like, hey, isn't that kind of weird? But really, but I just sense that we seem to know, we human beings seem to know that something is really missing in the way that we understand our world and the way that we understand ourselves trying to operate in that world. And that story that you tell reminds me, the story of this couple up in the Upper East Side. It reminds me of, again, I'm going to invoke Perelandria, when Ransom is wrestling with Weston, who is invited in some kind of spirit,
he's possessed.
He becomes the unman, right? And Weston Ransom is constantly sort of going back and forth, like, am I talking to to Western right now, or am I talking to unmanned? And the power there, it's just such a powerful and very similar, like these sort of weird physical movements that Lewis really captures.
Mhm.
It's such a fantastically strange book that
Oh,
I can't recommend highly enough. It's wonderful. It's really important.
well,
But do you sense that? I mean, you must, right? That even amongst
yeah.
the sophisticates, even amongst the sophisticates, we seem to be recognizing that the way in which we have understood the world for the better part of 200-300 years is falling apart.
Oh, that's true. And in fact, you and I know you're fond of a book that maybe I was the one who turned you on to it, or the other way around. That's how our
Yeah,
friendship
yeah,
works.
that's right. That's right.
The book They Flew,
Yeah,
Flew,
yeah.
by
I,
Carlos Eire.
I'll own this one. I'll own this one. I sent it to you. This is one I know. You sent me like 50,000 books, but this is one that
Good. Well,
I've sent
thank
to
you for
you.
that.
Yeah.
Well, tell the listeners, remind the
Yeah.
listeners what this book is about.
Yeah. So Carlos Ayer, he's a
Is that how you
Yale
say it? Air? Okay.
Ayer. Yeah. He's a Yale historian. I've since had a chance to meet him and spend a week with him. Really, a really top-notch guy, but he's a high-end, Yale historian.
National
Primarily,
Book Award winner.
yeah. Primarily, yeah. He wrote a really fantastic memoir, "Waiting for Snow in Havana." But his primary professional work has been he's an early modern historian, right? And he wrote a fantastic book called Reformations, which I cannot recommend highly enough. It's a really fair treatment of the whole thing. He's really kind of stepping back and really try. He himself, he considers himself a Catholic, but it's really not a partisan hit job. It really does a good job of sort of laying this whole thing out. Anyway, in the course of that research, he keeps coming up against all these strange stories, right? And in one point, he is he's in Avila, and he's at Saint Teresa's monastery, convent,
Now, she was a
and
great mystic, a great Catholic
right,
mystic of
right.
the Counter Reformation.
Right, of the Counter Reformation. So just from an historical perspective, he's on a trip and he's researching and he's going, he's on a tour, like you and I would go on a tour, right? And the person's saying, oh, this is where she slept, and this is where she ate, and this is where she levitated, and anyway, so sort of the tour guide is just sort of like being very kind of matter of fact about this whole thing, and so he's like, well, that's just so strange. Like, what's that? What do you mean she flew, she levitated? So anyway, this sends him down a major rabbit hole that he had been kind of researching on the side as he's going about his business, doing his professional academic work and teaching and all that. So finally, in the middle of COVID, he decides, I'm going to write the book. I'm going to write my weird book. Remember how Ross told you, Rod, it's time for you to write your woo book? Well, I kind of get the sense that Carlos has, he's sort of done his thing. He's on the back end of his career. He's having a grand old time. He's kind of untouchable at Yale, even Yale. He's like, I'm going to write the book. And so the book that he wrote is called They Flew, and it focuses on a number of things, St. Teresa of Avila being one of them, but also St. John of
The Cross.
no. Oh, darn. Cupertino.
St. Joseph of
St.
Cupertino. Yeah.
Joseph, sorry, St. Joseph of Cupertino. And anyway, he just sort of goes through this whole thing, and it's like, look, the power of testimony is real, right? And so he does a great job of so much of those early reports were filtered through the warfare of the Protestants and the Catholics, right? So that the Catholics were like, see, God is on our side, and then the Protestants were like, well, see, the Catholics are demonic, right? So it kind of like got lost. What got lost in the shuffle of those fights, which were just proxy wars, right, for theological arguments and political arguments, which were real, right, of course. But what gets lost in this whole thing is just an extraordinary amount of testimony, right?
Yeah. Well,
And
that's
so
it. Signed testimony by
right,
hundreds of people
right,
who attested with their names that they had seen this happen.
right, right. And what's so curious to me about living in the tail end here of the modernist imaginary is that we tend to be very sort of we pick and we choose about what testimony we believe and what testimony we don't. And I think what Carlos does such a great job on is like, you don't have that option, right? That actually, the sheer weight of this testimony, you can't merely dismiss it as sort of like crazy talk from a bunch of crazy people. And he's just, this is just not an option for us. And he really lays out this wonderful case. And I think significantly in the book, They Flew, what he does is he goes through a great amount of, there were indeed many people who tried to hoax the thing, right? Claimed that they were flying and claimed that they were doing all these sorts of things. And so he does a good job of laying out these testimonies that rise to the level of credibility, and those kind of testimonies that were seen as false. And again, significantly, especially through bad things like the Inquisition, quote unquote, right? Is the Inquisition was absolutely fired up to puncture as many holes into these kinds of stories as they could, because they recognize that the power of false claims is such that it can cause scandal amongst the faithful, right? We tend to think of the Inquisition as sort of like this big bad thing, and fine, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there weren't some things done, but I think what he does with the Inquisition is he shows that, well, actually it was a mechanism for maximal skepticism for outlandish claims, right? And so anyway, so read the book. It is wonderful. It's weird. It's strange. As he says at the end of the book, they flew.
Well, the thing that really stands out to me about the book is what he says at the very end. As a professional historian, he said there is no other area of human endeavor with which we scholars would completely dismiss massive amounts of written testimony except religion. Why is that? He says. Why is it that when people make claims, extraordinary claims about religious or spiritual events, physical events, we're like, oh no, that couldn't have happened. They must be making that up. Jeffrey Kripal down at Rice University, this has been his big crusade for decades now, to say that we in the modern era have locked ourselves into an epistemic box.
That's right.
That we will only admit certain information there. It's the old joke about a guy loses his keys and he's out looking under the spotlight at night in the yard. Somebody says, "Why are you looking here? You're not finding it." He goes, "Because this is where the light is." In other words, he won't.
It's so great. I love that.
Yeah, but it's true though, because the boundaries of where the searchlight is the only place that they will search, even if the truth is beyond there in the dark. And you're right about, we're at an extraordinary moment here, and one of the great warnings in living in wonder. And you and I may have talked about this on our former podcast. Came to me in 2022 when I was at Oxford at a conference, and this young Anglican seminarian, 27 years old, approached me and said, "You, my Gen X friend, need to understand that the new atheism is not the problem today. That's your generation.
That's right.
My generation, I guess he's older, Gen Z, said, we're not even interested in atheism. The real problem with us is the occult." Right. Because we, speaking of his generation, are so interested in having a transcendent, numinous experience. We find atheism and the claims of the new atheists to be completely flat and dull. You can't live on that. The problem is, he said, we're not looking to Christianity. And I would say, he and I didn't get to talk at great length about this, but I think part of what he would have said and what he implied was that so many in the church completely push the supernatural aside. Don't want to talk about it. They're embarrassed to talk about it, even if they believe it. But we have to talk about it because this stuff really happens. Secondly, I think this is true, that so many people don't want to look for it in the church, because if they find it, they'll have to convert. And converting to Christianity means you're no longer the Lord of your life, and you're certainly not the Lord of your sex life. Right. There's a story in Living in Wonder about the writer Tobias Wolff, the novelist, who tells a story about a miraculous healing he personally experienced at Lourdes when he was volunteering there as a young man. He had very poor eyesight, but he wouldn't wear glasses because he was vain. And he wasn't even really that much of a believer, but he had been raised Catholic and thought it would be good to go help out the sick at Lourdes. So he was healed at Lourdes, and he said he could see without glasses perfectly. He said, I had this overwhelming urge to go to the grotto at Lourdes, the miraculous grotto, and pray, just to say thank you. But he didn't do that. On his way to the grotto, he stopped off at the dorm where he and the other volunteers stayed. He got to drink it with an Irish friend, tell him the story. He never made it to the grotto, woke up the next morning, and his eyes were back to normal.
Wow.
And reflecting on this years later,
Yeah.
he said, the truth of the matter is, I didn't want that healing. Of course, I wanted to be able to see again.
Right.
But I somehow intuited that if I accepted this miracle, I would have to change my life in ways that I wasn't willing to do. He doesn't bring up sex, but I guarantee you that's what it was about, because that's why
100%.
I, as a young man in my 20s, stayed away from God.
Yeah, 100%. And I think about these various generational divides, and the one consistent amongst all of them, is that we really don't want to be told what to do, and especially as regards to our sex lives. I mean, I really believe that drives so much of things. And look, and I think that this is we are finding in the election right now. We're recording this a couple of days prior to the big day next Tuesday. That what? Well, let's go ahead and transition here. I wanted to talk about this anyway, but let's do this because I want to talk about the election, and I want to talk about Luce, and I think they're both connected, especially as you bring up, the sort of these generational divides, and I do think that this is important. But it appears, Rod, that and we knew this. I think you and I have had a conversation about this, but it's really true. The gender gap is so massive. In this election, we are really seeing it, and for years, the media shamed the Republicans into what are you going to do, Senator Romney or whatever? What are you going to do, Senator McCain? About the gender divide. And what I find fascinating about this is that the gender divide goes both ways. So in this current election cycle, we see a huge break, right, where the men are breaking to the sort of the conservative camp, and the women are breaking to the progressive camp. And it really seems to be about abortion. I mean, it really is about abortion. And we both know that abortion, of course, is the great safeguard for the sexual revolution. And I wonder what you make of this, not so much amongst our age group. We're old, right? But what about kids in their young adults in their 20s, a young man and a young woman? This gender divide thing doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and just abortion, because of the election and because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, abortion is the neuralgic point right now. But it's just one manifestation of this deeper divide that you can see across any number of categories. Young people are not meeting, they're not having sex. And look, if they were not having sex because they were making an affirmative choice for chastity, that would be great.
Right.
But they're not having
we would
sex.
be singing a different tune right now.
Yeah. But they're not having sex because they're afraid, or they can't make connections with the opposite sex. And their ways of seeing the world are diverging so massively. It's almost as if there's been a cluster B psychic break between men and women. And whoever wins next week, I don't see how this is going to be fixed. I mean, I saw, what's her name? I'm just going to say Big Mike, Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama gave this crazy talk, shaming men, saying, you must consider us women and what we're suffering when you vote. And could any Republican say to female voters, you must consider how men suffer, that we have the higher deaths of opioids and this and that? Of course not. The media would crucify that person. But that just tells you how so many newsrooms have turned into the Longhouse, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And look, that was why I, when the whole Longhouse, discourse, as such as it was a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I think was so important is that I do think that this is a real and a growing issue. And I get the sense that most people watched Mad Men, right? The great show, a great show, watched Mad Men and sort of suffer under the delusion that we still live in that world. We do not live in the world that is sort of dominated, at the managerial level by a bunch of, chauvinistic male pigs. It really
eternal Don Draper.
Yeah, like we don't live in Don Draper's world. We just don't. And I think young men know that, right? I'm not so sure the message has gone out. And again, it's always difficult, when you have these conversations, because you always have to sort of, offer this caveat and offer this qualification, and but at the end of the day, this divide is a real one. And I believe that, now look, men have their own issues, of course, and you and I think, would be very full-throated in our condemnation of those kind of maladies that are afflicting young men.
Pornography,
course.
leading, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, I did a really great, it wasn't my podcast. It was somebody else's podcast. I was on a show with this guy named Mac Nomadic on Twitter, and me and an old friend of mine, Greg Boris, had this great conversation about the sort of the myth of the vampire, and how it's a sort of pornography sort of plays upon that kind of myth in terms of what it's doing. It's actually a really great conversation. I'll put a link in the show notes here below. But we talked about this, right? The sort of the scourge of pornography there. But what I'm struck with is that the spirit that animates both the men who want their porn, and for the young women who want their abortions, right? What strikes me is sort of the similarity between those two things is that at the end of the day, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do with myself, right? There's this really strong core belief in autonomy. And I wonder if that is the sort of the stone, the big rock, the big boulder that we have lashed ourselves to. And, it's not a sustainable long-term mythology.
Well, yeah. So porn and abortion are technologies,
right?
That allow us to control the world,
right? And their game, right? They're gaming something within us, right?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, that's good. This is really, really an important phenomenon, because we are growing ever more divided along not only gender lines, but racial lines in America. And the whole DEI thing and wokeness, which is designed to do that, it's really just a power play.
That's right.
Because it's forever Selma, with the people who are the activists engaged in pushing progressive views on race. And the problem is, I probably the quote that's meant the most to me that I've read from any intellectual is Solzhenitsyn's great realization from the Gulag that the line between good and evil does not run between classes or races or anything. It runs down the middle of every human heart. Yeah. We have lost touch in our society today with that fundamental truth. And it's a very Christian truth too, because it's not to say that everybody is equally guilty of wrongdoing, but it is to say that every one of us is a sinner. Every one of us has faults. And we have to be conscious of that, to be humble in our approach to administering justice and seeking justice, because we also have to keep in mind mercy and have to keep in mind that we can do wrong things too. But you don't get ahead in politics in America today, whether it's cultural politics or electoral politics, by saying that you've done some wrong things too. I mean, look at Kamala. She goes on The View, right? Kamala Harris, and she's running as the change candidate, which is crazy because she's won an office. But this is what she's trying to do. And so Sonny Hostin, one of the hosts, says, so if you look back to the last 4 years, what would you have done differently? She kind of startled Kamala and says, well, I can't think of a single thing, because she can't admit error. So she's saying we need to change, but we've done nothing wrong. It doesn't make sense, but that's because there's no political power in admitting error.
So yeah, I'm struck here, on the final push here in that context, Rod. The closing argument for the Harris campaign appears to be yet another version of Orange Hitler, Orange Man Bad. And look, it could clearly be enough to put her over the edge. I think this is a classic nail biter.
She's put me over the edge, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I mean, I have no special insight into what's going to happen, of course, but it does seem to be that the closing argument that this is that she's not Trump, right? And it could work.
Now, here's an interesting thing that is really vivid to me, living as I do in Europe, in Budapest. It's offensive and insane that the Democrats and the liberals and the media are saying Trump is fascist, Trump is Hitler. And I don't think it's going to make a bit of difference to normal people. They just don't buy it. We've had, if that's true, we had 4 years of national socialism.
That's right.
And, But this
That's
guy,
right.
Renaud Camus,
Okay.
French
Yeah.
intellectual, he's the guy who came up with the great replacement idea, which was not what people said it was, but we'll let that pass.
Yep.
Camus had an essay that came out in 2007 called The Second Career of Adolf Hitler. What did he mean by that?
That's so good. Yeah,
And
go
he
ahead.
talks about how the left in Europe has, since the end of the Second World War, raised the specter of the return of Nazism to discredit anything that the right comes up with or anything of which they disapprove. And Camus said it's gotten to the point, and again, he wrote this almost 20 years ago in France, where the patient has been treated by these doctors who are so terrified of the sickness coming back that they have destroyed the society's immune systems that would allow them to fight lesser evils than Hitler, but they're all evils are lesser than Hitler, but that still threaten the integrity and the survival of the body. What he means specifically is immigration, mass migration, because in Europe for so long, to say you were against mass migration and multiculturalism is to invite hysterical comparisons to Hitler from the media, from top politicians. It can ruin a career. It can
from the church. I mean,
from the church.
No, I mean, this is exactly right, and this is true, in the United States as well. That if you were to suggest, as Trump did, I really do believe in retrospect that the reason why Trump won in 2016 is that he really did. He spoke to the concerns of native-born Americans, and just the idea of an integrity of a nation, as confusing and as multicultural as our nation is. I think people have that sense of like, well, this is still like our country, and clearly the elites who have run our country and run the international rules-based international order, as people will say, don't give a rat's behind about the nation. And I think Trump gets that, on some real level. And I don't know if you had a chance to see Trump on Joe Rogan, but watch it. I was, I think I have a little bit more of a comfortable sort of relationship, if that's the word, with the Orange Man than you do. But I was struck by, here's a guy for 3 hours having an actual conversation. I mean, just a genuine conversation. He's funny and he kind of does this sort of normal things, but he's not a cipher. He's not fake. That sounds so funny, but he's not fake in a really weird way. And I do think that those who hate him think he's fake, and those who like him think he's not fake. It's a fascinating Rorschach test.
Well, just so you know, I mean, I'm all for Trump this time openly, because I wrote this essay in European Conservative that said the enemy of my enemy is Donald J. Trump, which is to say I'm voting for him because the left is such a clear and present danger to free speech and so many other things I care about. I've got to vote for Trump. And I've softened on him. I've come to like him more. And in fact, our friend J.D. Vance has helped me to see Trump in a different light. But yeah, it's true. I mean, I tried to watch his Madison Square Garden speech the other night. I finally just turned it off because it was boring. Half an hour into it, he was all over the map. And
that stuff. That's sort of why I was making. I'm not a Trump rally guy myself. I've seen the clips and bits, and they're very funny. When he's funny, he's very funny. He's actually really got a pretty darn good comic timing and all that. But on Rogan, he's thoughtful. He was a human being. I think that's the sort of the big thing. And as of this recording, Rod, Harris has an invitation to go on the Rogan podcast, but for a variety of reasons, apparently is not going to do it. And they're coming up with all different reasons, and it's going back and forth. But I mean, I honestly
terrible in these formats. She doesn't know
she
her
couldn't
own
do it.
mind.
She couldn't do it. There's just no way she could do 3 hours with Rogan. And I've watched enough Rogan to know kind of how I think it would go. And he's great at what he does. I mean, I don't, if you only think of Joe Rogan as some sort of like ape-like workout drug guy, I think you're really missing part of what makes him so popular, which is he's curious. He has a depth to him that he doesn't flex. And so I just wonder, I mean, how long can you sort of keep up the fake kayfabe character for over the course of 3 hours? I don't think anybody can do that.
Well, and I want to say too, before we go on to our final
Yeah,
topic, before we
yeah,
land the plane, here in Europe, the whole specter of Nazism is, of course, nowhere stronger than in Germany.
of course, yeah,
You
yeah,
have the German state is going after what has become pretty much the second biggest party in Germany, the Alliance for Alternative for Germany, AFD, by its
yeah,
German acronym. And because they call it far right, Hitler is coming back and all that.
right,
If you go actually and look on what they stand for, they're just ordinary conservatives who are sick of migration tearing that country apart.
yeah,
Since you and I last spoke,
yeah,
I was on a panel in Berlin talking about migration and anti-Semitism. One of my co-panelists was a German parliamentarian, a woman
mhm,
who started out by saying, look, I'm not comfortable talking about this, but this aspect, but I need to say it. My 16-year-old daughter was raped by a migrant,
wow,
and this issue is very personal to me.
mhm,
Now, this woman is probably, just by saying that, on some German intelligence agency's list,
wow,
right? But here's the thing: if this is what I'm getting at,
yeah,
the Democrats could not have made it in our country more clear that Trump is Hitler. A vote for Trump is a vote for fascism. So what if Trump gets elected again
yeah,
next week?
yeah, yeah,
It shows this accusation has no currency at all. In Europe, this is going to cause a major upheaval, I think, because Der Spiegel, the top German
yeah,
news
yeah,
magazine,
yeah,
a couple of weeks ago, their cover story was called Public Enemy Number Two. It was about Elon Musk. Public Enemy
mhm,
Number One was Donald Trump.
mhm,
They really do see the European elites, Trump and Musk, as at the vanguard of recrudescent fascism. So if Trump comes to power, and Trump's very close friend is Viktor Orban, the prime minister of Hungary, where I live, and they have tried for years in Europe with some success to tar Orban as a fascist because he opposes mass migration and because he opposes and passed a law saying you can't propagandize minors and school children with transgender LGBT propaganda. Fascist. He said,
right,
of
right,
course, anybody who comes to Budapest is shocked by, like, this is fascism. Or where are the police? Where are the brown shirts? It's not true. I guess what I'm saying is, I think, and I look forward to this if Trump wins, the greater discrediting of the power of Hitler in his second career. They franchised
yeah.
Hitler here in elite circles in Europe and in the United States. If it is finally defeated in America by a Trump victory, please God, let the defeat of Hitler in his second career be soon to come in Europe.
Well, the problem, though, you're going to have is you have a lot of really high placed people who are deeply dependent upon the narrative being true, right? They need Orange Man to be Orange Hitler because their whole business model depends upon it. I think that's part of the hysteria you're seeing in the aftermath of the Washington Post
Oh, wow.
refusal by the behest of Bezos to not endorse the candidate, even though everybody knows exactly what the Washington Post editorial board thinks about Trump and Harris. Like it's just it's such it's schoolyard hysteria. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really laughable, and yet this is this is a threat, authoritarian threat to democracy. I guess I'm just so struck by the closing of this campaign is doubling and tripling down on this is sort of the second, as you're calling it, the second career of Hitler. I don't know what it's going to be like if Trump does in fact win clearly on election night or in the days after Tuesday. And I'll tell you this, Rod. I was a deep Trump skeptic the first go around, and I know people who worked in the Trump transition team. I know them very well, and I didn't believe them. Frankly, I thought that they were like, oh, they came after Trump before he even went in office, and he had to withstand, the kind of, behind the scenes wrangling and shenanigans that you wouldn't believe. And I didn't believe it. right? But I think what is clearly coming out now, right? If you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you can find these people who know stuff, who are talking about that transition in particular. And Molly Hemingway has a great piece in the Federalist today about why she knew when she knew of the Russian collusion hoax, and she knew it right away, and she was adamant from the beginning. And that has started getting me to see that we need to reassess the entirety of that first term. I really do believe, I really do believe that he was treated unlike any other president, maybe since Nixon. And to me, and again, I'm a newbie when it comes to these sorts of things, but this whole frame is relatively new to me. But I'm beginning to wonder if what really runs the United States of America are not the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch, but what really runs this country is the State Department. And fine,
the State Department,
right? Well, I mean, look, you can dismiss me as a kind of crazy conspiracy.
Oh, dude, I'm not. No. You're right. I found out. I saw an article today that said we now know the FBI knew about Hunter Biden's laptop in 2019 and knew it was real.
2016.
And they went out. They collaborated with this lie.
Right. So this is I mean, what I think American people, my audience, has to understand is that you have to understand that the same people who are running the show now were the same people who are running the Bay of Pigs bullshit. Right. I mean, like, really, I mean, and I know that they're technically different agencies, and fine, we can play all those games all we want, but the State Department clearly is running these kinds of things. And, you can think that they are only messing with foreign governments and foreign entanglements. No. They are doing the same thing now, here, now. And to me, that is the number one change in my whole frame and how I see things. Is I used to dismiss as sort of the crazy rantings of left-wing fringe elements about complaining about the CIA and all these kinds of things. Well, guess what? Then way more chaos. Crazy things happen. Right, exactly.
About chaos. Well, I think for me, Cale, one of the most symbolic moments in this entire campaign was Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney coming out and endorsing Kamala, and the Democrats welcoming the patriotic Cheneys. You and I are old enough to remember when the Cheneys were the great villains of the left.
Dude, it's like somebody gave me crazy pills. Like, this is so crazy, honestly.
But it shows. I mean, this is all. It's the establishment versus everybody else. Walter Kern had a great formulation. He said this election is about, I think it was Walter Kern or Martin Gurry, I forget. Anyway, they said this election is about the battle between the people who want to control and the people who do not wish to be controlled. And that was Martin Gurry on the Free Press, former CIA agent. And the people who want to control are the Cheneys, the Kamala Harrises, those who want to crush Elon Musk. Thank God for Elon Musk. I mean, I have problems with some of what he does.
But you and I are both the same on this one, because I don't like I don't like some of these sort of techno optimism stuff. But man, the fact that he bought Twitter 2 years ago really is like a small little thread, kind of keeping things sane-ish. I mean, it really is remarkable.
Because if it weren't for Twitter, like everybody else, I complain about Twitter, this hell site, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of garbage there.
I love it. I love Twitter.
If it hadn't been for Twitter, so many factual stories and commentaries debunking the lies that the establishment and the media and the government have been trying to shove down our throats would not have been debunked.
That's right.
Twitter does it.
Yeah, we pretend. I mean, think about how many people in mainstream media and the sort of the managerial class have just simply memory hold the whole Twitter files thing. They've completely
if it even came out, if they even reported on
it. They've completely dismissed it as a thing. And Rod, what was revealed in the Twitter files, is 100 times bigger than Watergate. 100 times bigger than Watergate. Our own government was colluding with tech companies to suppress necessary information and to help install a government. Like, relevant
information about the election.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this is why I hope Trump wins. Do I think he's going to fix everything? No, but at least we have a chance. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, I see him not as the sort of the great orange savior at all, believe me, but as a stopper, as a sort of a,
a
maybe
cataclysm.
he's maybe right, and maybe he's the small little rock that can change the course of a river, as we know that can happen. That's what I hope for him. I think that he's run a pretty good campaign. I think there were aspects of the Madison Square Garden thing that I wish had not happened, but like whatever, I'm not going to nitpick about these sorts of things. It's a baked dish essentially, but I think he's going to be a little bit smarter in terms of how he governs and manages if he were to get in. I really am concerned about the country in the aftermath. I don't know if you caught Mark Halperin's interview. Tucker interviewed Mark Halperin, and he basically said, look, man, if Trump wins, and it's looking like that's possible, that's what he said. He knows his business, he knows his stuff. If Trump wins, we're going to have a mass psychotic break amongst a lot of people
Oh my God,
who are
I
not
think we
going to be able to
will.
handle it.
I think they've worked themselves up into such an hysteria. And we have to remember, this is the first presidential campaign that I'm aware of in which a major candidate was shot and was almost shot a second time. Yeah. And that has been, it was just, it was something that happened. Let's move on to the next thing. Right. There's something really, really dangerous, a dangerous spirit afoot in the country. And it's not coming from Donald Trump and his followers. Right. That's the thing that I've had to see. It's not coming from them. You go to the rallies, I mean, and they seem to be happy people. Everybody I've read, Trump skeptics who've gone to the rallies are like, you know what? These people are pretty happy to be here.
Right. But remember, the mainstream press has preached since Biden's victory in 2020. They've been preaching, what is the number one threat to the United States of America? The number one threat to the United States of America is not Russia. It is not, China. It is not, X, Y, and Z. It is domestic terrorists. It is MAGA. I mean, that was really a major talking point for the Biden administration for the better part of, well, until he just sort of gave up about 6 months ago. That was the major talking point of his administration. Dark Brandon and all that sort of stuff. I mean, so my concern is not so much that the flyover country thinks this, but rather all the people that I live amongst here in the sort of the eastern and western, the deep blue country, that the number one threat are these people who go to these rallies. And I mean, you saw just a day or two ago, President Biden called the people who go to MAGA rallies trash. And they tried to sort of massage it as well. He didn't really say that, but he did. He absolutely said it. And so therefore, what do you do with trash?
You take it out.
You take it out. What do you do with a Nazi dictator? You take him out, right? And so last week, Kamala Harris suspends her campaign for a day, sort of, flies back to Washington D.C. and gets up in front of her residence,
podium and residence,
her podium, and basically says that Donald Trump is unhinged. He's authoritarian. He's becoming more dictatorial and unstable. I mean, like, Rod, what? I mean, like, just think about this. If this were an episode of a television show,
we know what would happen next. Yeah, and this is why, honestly, I don't pray for politicians. I've been praying for Trump and Vance precisely because of this. Just protect them, get us through, because God knows what would happen to America if somebody took a shot at him and succeeded.
Yeah, for another time, you and I should talk about Vance. I know he's a friend, of course. But he's been amazing, honestly. And I have a sort of a personal swear in my life that I don't stick up for politicians. I just let politicians be politicians. I will be critical of politicians, but I'm not going to like stick up for Trump. I'm not going to stick up for Vance. I'm not going to stick up for guys that I'm more sympathetic to philosophically. Like, they're politicians. They don't need me to be boosters, right? But man, he's been impressive. He's been impressive.
I think for me, the main reason to vote for Donald Trump is gateway to President Vance 2028.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
speaking of praying, I want to get one last topic in before we have to close down shop. And just a brief before we get to part 3 of the show. This has been great, Rod. Like honestly, like it's a balm for me to sort of getting back to sort of
yeah,
shooting
it's
the
been
breeze
fun.
with you. It's been great. I miss you, man. I miss you. So, the Vatican, yet just yesterday or 2 days ago, unveiled a new mascot, a new mascot for a new, what do they call
The
it?
Jubilee year.
The Jubilee year, right? And her it its name is Luce, Luce. Now,
Light.
Rod, where were you when you first saw a picture of
Like,
Luce?
yeah, she's just this sexless anime creature with these big eyes. I'm like, they cannot be serious. They, there she is. They honestly cannot be serious. This is the freaking Vatican. These
Yeah,
people, you can tell I'm upset about it.
yeah,
These people are sitting on perhaps the world's greatest collection of art. They're the custodians not only of art objects, but of a tradition of sacred art that is, just unparalleled. And yet, when they want to pick out want to create a logo or a figure to represent the Jubilee year, what do? They go to like the lowest dregs of pop culture, and they think they're making some profound statement of solidarity with the youth. I
yeah.
just,
I,
it's so trivial.
it is.
I know what you're going to say because you and Steve Skojak and other Catholics have really gotten a lot of pushback from Gen Z people.
Yeah.
But I'm like, my thought is if you men at the Vatican want young people to take the faith seriously, then you've got to show them that you take it seriously yourself.
That's right.
They don't. It's trivializing things. It's so trite.
Right. I mean, you think about this, Rod. You are an institution which is, as it understands itself, right, to be the mouthpiece and protector of the Lord of the universe, the Lord and the Creator of the universe. Can we just pause there for a second and think, like, how serious should you take your work? Well, I would hope that you would take it seriously. And you see something like this come out and you realize that the bureaucrats who run the church, right, we're not, this is not a theological discussion as much as just sort of like a governmental practical like initiative. This is what you come up with, and this is the quote. Remember, this is from the prefect of um evangelization, right?
Yeah,
Remember, so
he's
this is
the
all done.
top
He's
guy for evangelization,
right.
Archbishop Fisichella.
Right. So he says the mascot, he said, was inspired by the church's desire, quote, to live even within the pop culture so beloved of our youth. And man, that's a painful one right there. That is a painful one. And, so Archbishop Rino Fisichella, pro-prefect of the dicastery for the evangelization section for new evangelization and the chief organizer of the whole year 2025, announced at a news conference on the 28th of October. So 2 days ago.
Forever 1974 for these people.
It really is, right? And what I'm trying to convey to the folks, right, is that, look, I lived through and fled the flannel church of the late 70s and early 80s, right? That really happened. Okay. And it was stupid then. And I knew it was stupid when I was 16 years old. I really did. And that's why I left. And you know what brought me back to the faith, Rod? So I started to read a few books. And I started to realize that there was whole swaths of the tradition that I had just been kind of kept from. Right. And when I started to read these great things and encounter these great things, see great art, see and meet priests who took their job very seriously, understood that they were, representatives of the Lord and Creator of the universe. That's when I started to take it seriously. And this little Luce, and I don't think that Luce means Lucifer. I think that's absurd.
No,
I don't think the staff is like a witch's staff. Like, fine, whatever. I'm not even getting into it. But the fact of it, it's a toy. It is a toy, and it looks like something out of my children's Switch game called Animal Crossing, right? It looks like a cute little thing that sort of does its thing. Now, what is a person who's like, oh, I think I'm going to go on a pilgrimage because of Luce, right? What happens when they like confront, the ever ambient and prevalent materialism that their teachers are going to sort of convey to them in their 6th and 7th and 8th grade classrooms? They're like, oh wait, but Rod, I'm going to stay Catholic because Luce. I mean, it's dumb, right? It's dumb and it's low res. And I would just, one more thing, I'm going to rant. I got to go do this, right? I'm going to say something to so all the Zoomers, on the Twitter, right? They're all like, oh, okay, boomer. Hilarious that you and I are now boomers, but like, that's fine. Like, whatever. If they only knew that they are actually the heirs to boomerdom, and maybe, my sense is they're kind of trolling and they're kind of having some fun on Twitter and just kind of razzing things. And, oh, Luce is so good. She's so great. At the end of the day, for me, it stands for a kind of banal triteness that you would think we would be better than. And then last little note, sorry, one more note. I can't help but see this little doll on the podium being sort of like, pushed forward by an archbishop. I can't help but seeing it in the context of Spotlight. I'm sorry. It's just creepy.
Child abuse.
Absolutely. It's creepy, right? And I'm not saying that the archbishop is a child abuser. I'm not saying that, but like, read the room, right?
It was pretty unfortunate visual.
Yeah, any consultant worth their salt would have been like, hey guys, maybe we shouldn't go with a doll. Maybe we shouldn't do that.
Well, right? Do you remember the Kevin Smith movie Dogma came out like 25 years ago?
Buddy Jesus. Yeah.
This is Buddy Christ, but it's real, right? And
right. That's right.
You can't parody this anymore. The Vatican. We had at our Orthodox church when I was living in Baton Rouge when COVID was going on.
Yeah,
we started seeing more young evangelicals, especially evangelical men, but some young married couples coming to the Orthodox Church. And we'd ask them, what brings you here? And many of them had some version of this answer. We know this opened our eyes, COVID did, to how fragile everything really is. Yeah. And we know that we're going to require a faith that's a lot deeper and more serious if we're going to make it through the future.
Right.
And they knew that, like the whole evangelical megachurch pop production, as entertaining as it was, it didn't have they didn't feel that it was going to have what it took to hold on if things really fell apart in this culture. Right. And I think the same thing about Luce. It's just, if Catholics want to do that, fine. But this is the Vatican. This is the top ministry and the head of the Church of Rome, over 1 billion people, deciding that they want this trivial, like Bratz doll, as if designed by Marco Rupnik, to be your symbol. And I guarantee you that, I haven't talked to you about this, but I've had people over the past few months reach out to me, Catholics, saying that finally they're coming to Orthodoxy. They've had it. And I don't encourage people to do that. I mean, if you want to find out about Orthodoxy, I'll tell you, but I don't see it as my business to go evangelize for Orthodoxy in particular. Mm-hmm. But I have to tell you, there have been over the past year, I get more and more inquiries from Catholics who just, I'm done. And it's stuff like this. They do not think that the people who run the church even believe it anymore.
Right. Amen. Right. And to me, this is the guy who's in charge of evangelization. And what it tells me, whether this is true or not, but what is conveyed to me, just from a public relations standpoint, is that the person in charge of evangelization does not believe in evangelization. Right. In other words, you're in charge of evangelization, and you believe that a toy doll is going to sort of like seal the deal. And it's so unserious. I mean, it's profound. I mean, it's profoundly unserious,
deeply shallow.
Right. And it ramifies out. And I suppose one upside is that it's not a piece of Rupnik art. So that's good, right?
There's
Score
that.
one.
It wasn't created by a pervert.
That's right. Score one, or was it, Rod? Because if you look into the details, I don't know if you've done any sleuthing on this, but
No.
the outfit that designed Luce has some pretty sketchy things in his design portfolio, including adult material. So, and I mean this, I'm not joking. So once again, Rod, I teach, right? I'm a teacher, right? And I'll tell you that, you could have asked me just as a teacher, like, hey, like, what would your students, I have children who are in middle school, like, what would your students or your children think of Luce? And I would have given them an earful, and I would have been like, and I would have rattled off all the reasons why this was stupid, right? But just from a public relations standpoint, how do you not know this? How do you not, hey, we've lived through a couple of media storms in the France's papacy. Maybe we should look into what other things this guy has done. We've hired to make this logo / this toy. Maybe we should look at it. How can you not know that, dude? You and I are just like two guys who like teach and write for a living. Like that's what we do. How do you not know that this is how things work?
And I guess we can end on this. I see we're running out of time. I heard a quote from some evangelical evangelist who said, what you win them with, meaning winning people to Christ, what you win them with is what you win them to. Well, if you apply that principle to Luce,
totally.
What are you trying to win people to? What kind of church, what kind of experience of Christ? It's all plastic and sweet and cheap. And, like what did Flannery O'Connor say? That people think the faith is an electric blanket, but in fact, it's the cross.
That's right.
It's just, there's nothing heroic about any of this.
That's right. And to your point, you said, look, my kids are older now, right? They're in middle school and high school now. When they were 2 and 3 years old, I would have loved to have had like a Luce doll. Like that would have been cute, right? Like, like next to their little rosary and next to their, their sort of baby Bible book with the pictures of Noah's Ark and fine. 3 and 4 year olds, totally fine. I mean, really, I mean that. And we did that kind of stuff in my home, right? And I would expect, at a Paris CCD operation that you would have these kinds of things. Totally fine. But you're the prefect for evangelism. You're the guy. This is Rome we're talking about, right? This is Rome.
Can you think of one young heterosexual male who would be drawn to the Catholic faith because of Luce?
Zero.
No.
And what they would say, and I'm going to quote my high school students here, what they would say is, Mr. Zeldin, it's fake and gay. That's what they would say. And of course, when they say fake and gay, they're not talking about homosexuals. They're not talking about gay guys. They're using fake and gay as like, it's dumb and stupid, facile, and I can't believe you're wasting my time with it, right? Which is a core violation, right? It's like, you don't waste their time, you don't bore them, and you don't waste their time. And this whole Luce thing. And so you're seeing all these kind of winsome, guys, like, why are you complaining about Luce online? Like, take a chill pill, relax. And it's like, well, you know what? I'm kind of tired of playing the relax game. I'm tired of that.
The house is on fire.
Right.
And this is how the Vatican responds.
That's
Here in Europe, everything is falling apart for the church in terms of people just exiting en masse, no pun intended, the Catholic Church. Right. And this is what they come up with. It's it's beyond a scandal. But as Ross Stout had said on Twitter yesterday, this papacy will end in due time.
Amen.
But will the people? I mean, this isn't just Pope Francis, right?
Right. Exactly. And I think that's why you and I can have these kind of fruitful conversations. This is not like we're not even sort of arguing in any kind of like partisan sort of standpoint. It's like you and I are just two adult Christians who care deeply about the transmission of the faith to young people, and like, as you have always said, right? I'm not a believing Catholic, but it matters to me what the Catholic Church does, because we live in the world in part that is governed.
I'm a man of the West, and that is the foundational church of the West. There's just no getting around that. I believe that Western civilization, its health stands or falls on the health of the Catholic Church. I'm more than happy for people to come into Orthodoxy. I wish they would. It's been fantastic, but that's not going to happen en masse in the West. The Catholic Church, our brothers and sisters in Christ, and the Roman Catholic Church are going to have to carry this. and they are being led by a bunch of morons and cowards. The leadership class in the Catholic Church is just a complete freaking disaster. Now, we Orthodox have our problems too, but at least we're not going to have a bishop or the bishops putting up some Orthodox Luce, because they wouldn't even be able to understand it. They're like, wait, these are the things of God we're talking about. Come on.
Well, in the year of our Lord 2024, we see that the leadership crisis abounds in nearly every institutional layer that we can cook up right now. Right, we're seeing this breakdown in the church. We're seeing this breakdown in the state. We're seeing this breakdown in education, medicine, anything, journalism, anything that we care about. Right, there's something deeply, deeply sick and wrong with our leadership class. But as you said, as Ross said, this papacy, this leadership class will die, right?
Well,
and
and I do hope, and I need to close on this because I got to go out to do some shopping before the stores close. My book, Living in Wonder, is about finding hope. I've talked about the dark enchantment, the false enchantment of drugs and the occult, but mostly it's a book about where and how people, especially Christians, can look at the world to find God's beauty, God's goodness, God's presence there, and to reanimate the thing that brought most of us to the faith, that primal experience of wonder. It's possible. Probably not going to happen if we're sitting around waiting for our pastor, our priest, our pope, our patriarch to bring the wonder to us. We're going to have to go searching for it, but it can be found. The thing is, it's not like finding wonder. It's not like magic. As this one Roman exorcist told me, he said, the thing about the demons, you summon them, they will come. They'll come every time, and they'll come to enslave you. God doesn't work that way. God is not a technology. God wants our love freely given, not given as a quid pro quo for some favor he's done. But God is there. And the way to become present or become aware of God's presence, I talk in the book about practical things we can do, from changing our minds to our prayer lives, things like that. But the basic fact is this: achieving enchantment and the ability to perceive God's presence in the world is not like getting information passed on from the teacher to the student. It's not about acquiring information. It's rather about learning how to be staring at the right corner of the sky when a comet goes blazing past. And it can be done. Be of good cheer. You and I complain all the time, rightly, about all the problems in the world, but I think we're both pretty happy people because we're always looking for comets.
I agree. And this last bit, I know, despite, when I'm on Twitter and kind of like, going off, it's like, I'm not crying. Like, I'm just like,
having fun.
Yeah, I'm pointing things out. I actually am having a good time. But speaking of, Rod, this has been really amazing. Thank you so much for coming back on and doing this with me. I hope to have you on again. Of course, we'll have a sort of a what happens a week out, a week after, 2 weeks after. Yeah. Hopefully it'll be a lighter fare. But I really want to thank you for coming out. Guys, if you have not gotten your copies of Living in Wonder, I cannot recommend the book highly enough. Rod, you really wrote, I think, my favorite book of yours so far. And I know I'm a fan, I know I'm a homer, but it's really good. And I really believe that it can be helpful for people trying to negotiate, navigate kind of all the things we're talking about right now. So thank you.
Navigate the underneath, maybe?
Yes, indeed. All right. Until next time, brother. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.